Wv Uncommonplace. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts. Along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episodes. The Uncommonplace digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacey and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to our uncommon place.
Welcome to West Virginia Uncommonplace. Today's episode is probably one of the most controversial episodes I'll ever do. This episode is entitled Racism. Now, racism is something that a lot of people ask me about because I'm light-complected, African-American, and they, depending on who asks me about racism, you don't get the same answer out of me. So we'll start at the very beginning. I'm from Lynchburg, Virginia, and where I'm from, there was racism, but racism was very closeted. You could hear, and I'm not saying like, when I talk about racism, I ain't talking about somebody saying the word nigger, because people said that out of ignorance growing up, just because of where I'm from. But racism I'm talking about right now is like what happened to me. Now, mind you, my mom and dad, racism comes in certain types of factors and stuff. So to tell a little bit about us, we started out in a trailer park, and my mom and dad worked hard and moved into the middle class. He became a real estate agent, blah, blah, blah. So we were followed around by a lot of education and a lot of proudness in our community because we were middle class. Like, everyone across the board in my family was middle class. As we got into the 80s, like by the time I was 88, 89, we were middle class. So the racism that presented itself to us wasn't necessarily always from white people or other ethnicities. It was actually inside our own race. Started out for me, my first incident with racism was another kid that was African American. We were younger, and he called me a moon cricket. And I didn't know what that meant then. I just thought it was a joke, so I just went on with it throughout life. And then as I got older and I found out what a moon cricket was, I was like, wow, the first person to be racist to me wasn't even a white person. It was someone that was black. Wow. Now, as I got older, elementary school and middle school, racism wasn't a thing like I'm going to say that, oh, I'm a black person and I'm being discriminated on. No. The racism that I saw was in the class systems of middle class, lower, and upper, and then the really rich people. For instance, for me, because I was from middle class and we dressed fairly decent, I was invited to a lot of things that other black kids weren't invited to. I was always able to go do things, not necessarily with the elite or anything like that, but I always had an opportunity to go places that the other kids, which would be, the other kids that I went to school with, like the African Americans, like they didn't always get invited to the plush parties and this and that across these areas. So as an adult now, I kind of see where that racism came in. Like, it was always, the racism that came in for me was let him be the token black person for our event. So some may deem that as not being racist, but yeah, it was really racist to me because I was isolated and made to feel comfortable being with this set group of people, which I have no problem with black or white people, so I'm not saying it like that. So that was the second instances of racism. And then the third part of racism that came along when I was a younger person, it was actually the inclusion of actually being involved in things. See, so I know like that sounds kind of counter to what I just said a minute ago, but it really is, like, it's really some crazy stuff. I would write essays and I would do certain things so that I could get a few steps ahead and feel better about myself, which all that stuff was fine. But I noticed that when I would try to excel in my own community of black people, they did not like me to excel. They didn't want me to be reaffirmed in my education, which I even to this day, it still baffles me, but you see it in the different areas. So, get to middle school. In middle school, I started seeing blatant racism. I see the white people that don't want to have black people around, and they make it known. I see that, but and once again, falling back on my education, I was always educated enough to know that level of ignorance, that maybe I just don't need to deal with those people. So throughout middle school, I went along and I made sure that I aligned myself with the right people that were going to help me with my education, and that's where the next bit of racism came in from the African American community, because I wasn't, I grew up in suburbia, so being in suburbia, over the hill from where I lived, there was a trailer park, and the trailer park has always been a diversity of people that have money and people that are in between money, because a lot of people rent trailers and they stay for a few months and then they leave, or something happens. It's always a temporary situation in these trailer parks. I never knew anybody that lived in the trailer park their whole life. So at this point, I live in the suburbs, normal little, everybody's got an acre or two, a yard, whatever. So I'm growing up with all the different kinds of people, because my street had black and white people in it. And I started doing things that were too white in the opinions of the black people that were around. They said that I was too white, I wasn't urban enough. And that's something that would follow me throughout the rest of my life, that I could never make the cut because I wasn't urban enough. I didn't have a definitive struggle. Well, get into the teen years, and I noticed where I grew up, it's a big area, Lynchburg, Virginia and stuff, Bedford and Roanoke and all that stuff. So you meet so many different people. And I just got to the point where, like, I seen the blatant racism and people categorized it with the rednecks, and sometimes it was rednecks and sometimes it wasn't even rednecks. Sometimes it was just some educated white people that just didn't like black people, and it was black people being racist too. So I grew up around this bubble of racism that it was either really intense, or we just act like it didn't exist, or it didn't exist. So up until towards the end of high school, that's when race relations weren't as intense going into like my senior year, because everybody mingled with everybody and we accepted everybody to a certain degree. But one thing inside of racism that I learned from 15 to 18, it was certain types of events that we kept inside the black community and certain type of events that white people kept inside their community. And then if we did interracial events, and this is in the 2000s, everybody was all cool and stuff. But even back then in 1999, 2000, 2001, it was still frowned upon for races to be dating each other where I'm from. Nobody had a hardship to it, but they weren't necessarily all in agreement to it. So with that high school stuff, heading on into my 20s and stuff, racism, like for me, like when we're talking about like going to work, going anywhere, it kind of fizzled out of the equation because everybody was so worried about working, going to college, getting an education, or furthering themselves. Or you had your party goers, like they just would do whatever they had to with the party goers. So, sorry for the long pause. I had to recollect my thoughts. So, racism in my 20s, I had a kid by now and all this stuff, and he's a mixed kid. I noticed my kid was getting treated way better in West Virginia than most places. Like, people think of West Virginia as a really racist place. And I will say this, Harts Creek, West Virginia, they are racist there. Hurley, Virginia, they're racist there. And racism that I've seen is not what is depicted on TV. Racism is when someone, in my opinion, like out here in West Virginia, and I've seen it, people act natural when you come around. But if someone is overtly nice, and I said overtly, overtly, overtly nice, and keep coming up with these comments of, oh, I got black friends for this. I have my black friend, hey, I'm friends with this black guy right here. I played basketball with Rory Sparrow, in Norfolk, West Virginia. So, I started seeing the different side of racism. Like, it wasn't this, we're going to holler nigger and all this extra stuff. Nah, it was how nice and how, like, it was being way too nice. That was a form of racism, and I didn't even notice it until I was older. And I noticed, like, all these people, and then people that just act natural. And when I'm saying natural, they don't have any apprehension with you being around. Like, I know someone's racist, myself personally, when I go around them and they're watching me continuously moving, doing things. I even picked up this example, like when you're in a restaurant, for instance, like I was in a Hardee's one time, and it was just me in there, and these people weren't cleaning that place, but they started, everybody in the restaurant, they were all white, they started cleaning, like around the areas where I was eating at. Like, instead of cleaning the whole place, they cleaned right in that section and made sure that they were still cleaning until I was done eating. And I was like, am I going to be sensitive and act like this is what it is, or am I going to just not act like it? So I left out because I'd spent my money, got my food, I was done. And that right there was in my mid-20s. Now, ever since then, I aligned myself with the people that make sense to me. That's one thing that I didn't do when I was younger. I didn't make sense of things by I aligned with people that I wasn't supposed to be with. I always were in groups that I wasn't supposed to be in. And saying that sounds kind of crazy because some people are like, oh, you can go wherever you please. But no. It does not work like that at all. The more and more I stayed in West Virginia, the more and more I did for my African American people, the more that I did white stuff, as they said, the lesser my authenticity to black people stayed. Now, other people consider me, just a normal person, and those are the type of people that I involve with. I try in my lifetime not to involve too many race matters because in my section of the world and what I do in life, racism is not really an issue. Because I don't make a big issue out of things. Like, I've had racist things happen. Like, I was in a restaurant and someone said, I'm going to be dark like him one day. And that was just a young kid. So obviously it heard something at home. So I knew about that type of racism. So I don't get that mad over that. The racism I get mad over now is this inclusion racism. Like, why include me in an event just because I'm black? Like, include me because of the merits that I have, the work that I've done, or just basically the body of my catalog. That's the only racism that I deal with now is this inclusion racism. Like, people get really butthurt and get upset when people are like, oh, this isn't racist or that isn't racist. All kinds of shit's racist. Like, I will never stray away from things that are racist on both sides, black or white. But to dig deeper into this, to go on to the other side of racism that has bothered me as an adult is people using racism as a way to define a struggle. I can understand certain adversities in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 40s, and all these other places that capped racists and, put them in certain places. But in my lifetime, from 1985 up until today, I've been able to, if I put my mind to it, achieve the education I need to get me to the position that I need to. Did I have financial struggles? Yes. I had to learn how to make money, blah, blah, blah. Everybody goes through some type of whirlwind circumstance that builds up that type of character. So I get that. But I cannot blatantly say that some white man, some black man, some white female, some black female held me down from a position or kept me out of a job. Because nobody in any race has ever done it. The only time that I've kept myself out of a job is when I ran my mouth or when I truly wasn't qualified for something and I was just trying to shoot the breeze. But going further and further into this whole racism thing, the one question I always get asked is West Virginia the most racist place I've been? And I'm going to answer that clearly today. No. The most racist places I've been in my life have to be Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. That down south hate is a different type of racism I can't even speak on because I don't deal with it that often. And also that takes to another state, like where I'm from, where I live in West Virginia, and I'm kind of from a non-aggressive mode and means. I don't, like, one thing that happens in frustration that happens inside this thing and people attribute it to what racism is, this racial aggression that people try to push when they're pushing a racial point. If people wouldn't be so racially aggressive about things, sometimes things could plateau. And I understand that we sit there and we have things that are stereotyped to us, because I'm stereotypical too, like some things like white people putting raisins in their potato salad. They made a joke of it on Saturday Night Live with the Black Panther. So something like that, yeah, I can understand. Like, we're all at fault for stuff like that, because there's certain things that are stereotypical. Like, people say we eat watermelon and eat fried chicken and stuff like that. Well, them type of stereotypes, that's racism too. But what I'm trying to deal with it and make my point about what this whole podcast was that we deal with racism in different fashions, but we all deal with it somewhere. Even if we look away from it, even if we try to be politically correct and say, well, there is no racism. No, there's still racism. And I haven't even dug deep into police relations and different stuff like that. That's not my forte with what I'm talking about with racism. My point for doing this whole thing about racism was to let you know kind of like where I come from, because coming from being African American, middle class, and light skinned, my society, black people consider me white by them standards. Like, they don't even, like, if you've never seen a picture of what I look like and you just hear the way I talk, they automatically assume I'm white. So that's my main reason for stressing for doing this episode, is because, like, it's not alright to be racist. I will never say that. It's not alright to be stereotypical, but it does exist, and acting like it doesn't exist is one of those things that, like, hurts you more than not saying it's happening. And to anybody that listens to this, I hope you got a little bit of something from this. You learned a little bit more about me. And if you've never experienced the culture of being black, white, or whatever in America, ask people about it. Because it is literally night and day when it comes to certain situations. And then other situations, we're all 100% alike. And this has been a great conversation. I'm JR from West Virginia Uncommonplace. And the crazy thing about this episode is this episode, just for an experiment, I recorded this all on my Apple Watch. So we'll hear what it sounds like later.
Please follow Wv Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at woncommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.